The woman stood in her doorway, tears streaming down her face. 47 years of marriage reduced to boxes. But what happened next changed everything I understood about letting go. She cleared an entire 4-bedroom house in 48 hours, using 7 ancient principles that most people will never understand. Stay until the end. The 7th principle will shatter everything you think you know about attachment and freedom. Hidden wisdom. Listen carefully. What I'm about to share comes from watching countless souls transition through the deepest valleys of their existence. When life forces you to release everything you've held dear, when circumstances strip away the comfortable illusions we call security, something profound emerges. The elderly possess a wisdom that younger generations desperately need but rarely seek. They understand impermanence not as a concept, but as lived truth. This woman I speak of received merely 24 hours warning before the care facility demanded her immediate arrival. Her children resided on the opposite continent. Her husband departed 6 months earlier. The home that once buzzed with dinner gatherings and birthday festivities now stood like a gallery of memories too burdensome to bear. What emerged during these 2 days unveiled principles that surpass mere home organization. These are laws of inner freedom that extend to every domain of human anguish. Most people approach letting go backwards. They focus on what they're losing instead of what they're gaining. They cling to objects as if the memories live inside the physical items rather than within their own consciousness. They mistake accumulation for achievement, possessions for security, and external validation for inner worth. The result is a life weighed down by the very things meant to serve them. But watch someone who has lived through real loss, someone who has seen the temporary nature of all external forms, and you witness a different relationship with material existence. They move through space differently. They hold things lightly. They understand the difference between appreciating beauty and being enslaved by it. This is not callousness born from pain, but wisdom earned through experience. First truth. The first principle operates from a fundamental understanding that most people resist with everything they have. Everything you own owns you back. Every possession demands attention, energy, space, and maintenance. Every object carries emotional weight, whether you recognize it or not. The seniors who master rapid decluttering understand this energetic exchange at the cellular level. When she opened the first closet, this woman didn't see clothes. She saw years of shopping trips motivated by loneliness, professional costumes for roles she no longer played, and fabric representations of who she thought she needed to be. The question wasn't which items still fit or looked good. The question was which energies deserved space in her new chapter. This is where most people fail before they begin. They approach decluttering as a practical task rather than an emotional and spiritual practice. They focus on organizing chaos instead of examining why they attracted chaos in the first place. They rearrange their external world while leaving their internal patterns completely untouched. The ruthless approach begins with radical honesty about the relationship between your possessions and your psychology. That expensive kitchen gadget you've never used isn't just taking up cabinet space. It's a daily reminder of aspirational cooking habits that highlight the gap between who you are and who you wish you were. Those books you'll definitely read someday aren't just occupying shelf space. They're monuments to intellectual insecurities and the constant pressure to become more knowledgeable. Understanding this connection transforms decluttering from a weekend project into a pathway towards psychological freedom. When you release objects that no longer serve your authentic self, you release the emotional patterns that attracted them. When you stop using possessions to fill internal voids, you finally have space to address what created those voids in the first place. Second truth. The second principle challenges everything our consumer culture teaches about value and worth. Sentimental attachment is often disguised hoarding of unprocessed emotions. The items we claim hold irreplaceable memories are frequently anchors, keeping us trapped in versions of ourselves that no longer exist. She held her wedding dress for 20 minutes, not because she couldn't decide whether to keep it, but because she was saying goodbye to the young woman who wore it 47 years ago. The dress represented hopes, dreams, and expectations that belonged to a different lifetime. Keeping it wouldn't preserve those feelings or that person. Releasing it honored both the experience and the woman she had become. This distinction between honoring memories and being imprisoned by them determines whether decluttering becomes liberation or trauma. Memory doesn't live in objects. Memory lives in consciousness. The photograph of your grandmother doesn't contain her love. Her love lives in the way you treat others, the values she instilled, the patterns she modeled. The object is merely a trigger for accessing what already exists within you. But our attachment to physical reminders often reveals deeper fears about memory, mortality, and meaning. We cling to objects because we're terrified of forgetting, of people becoming footnotes in our personal history, of experiences losing their significance. This fear transforms possessions into emotional life support systems, keeping us connected to past versions of reality while preventing us from fully engaging with present opportunities. The ruthless approach requires distinguishing between items that genuinely serve current needs and items that feed psychological dependencies. A few carefully chosen mementos can honor the past without dominating the present. But rooms full of unused possessions masquerading as memory preservation usually indicate unresolved grief, identity confusion, or fear of moving forward. When you release items that represent who you used to be, you create space for who you're becoming. When you stop using objects to maintain connection with departed loved ones, you discover that true connection happens through embodying their best qualities rather than displaying their belongings. Third truth. The third principle operates from understanding that most accumulation stems from attempts to control an uncontrollable future. We buy backup items for scenarios that may never occur. We save things for someday projects that reflect fantasy versions of our lives. We hoard resources out of scarcity programming that treats abundance as temporary luck rather than natural flow. By noon on the first day, she had filled 6 garbage bags with items purchased for future selves who never materialized, craft supplies for artistic hobbies she never developed, exercise equipment for fitness goals she never pursued, kitchen appliances for entertaining she rarely did, professional clothing for career advancement that never happened. Each category revealed assumptions about who she would become rather than acceptance of who she actually was. This future-focused accumulation creates multiple problems simultaneously. It clutters your physical environment with possibilities that drain energy rather than create it. It reinforces the belief that your current self is insufficient, requiring constant improvement or addition to be worthy. It prevents you from fully utilizing and appreciating what you already possess. Most importantly, it keeps you living in imaginary tomorrows instead of available todays. The ruthless approach demands brutal honesty about the difference between realistic preparation and fantasy-based hoarding. Keeping 1 extra tube of toothpaste makes practical sense. Keeping 17 tubes because they were on sale reflects scarcity mindset and space mismanagement. Having tools for hobbies you actively pursue serves your interests. Having supplies for activities you might someday consider wastes resources and creates guilt. This principle extends beyond physical objects into every area of life where accumulation substitutes for authentic engagement. How many books do you own versus how many have you actually read and applied? How many business ideas do you collect versus how many have you implemented? How many relationships do you maintain at surface level versus how many do you develop with depth and vulnerability? True abundance comes from maximizing the potential of what you already have rather than constantly acquiring more. True security comes from developing adaptability and resourcefulness rather than stockpiling possessions. True preparation for the future comes from building skills, relationships, and wisdom rather than accumulating stuff. Fourth truth. The fourth principle recognizes that our possessions often serve as external validation systems, substituting for internal self-worth. Brand names, expensive items, and status symbols become identity props, supporting fragile egos that haven't learned to find value from within. Seniors who master rapid decluttering often do so because age has revealed the emptiness of external validation. She laughed while sorting through jewelry she rarely wore, but couldn't imagine discarding. Pieces purchased to celebrate promotions, anniversaries, achievements. Each item carried stories about recognition, success, and social positioning. But looking at them now, she realized they had become golden handcuffs, beautiful reminders of how much external approval she had needed throughout her life. This recognition transforms decluttering from loss into empowerment. When you release items that served ego-based functions, you free yourself from the exhausting performance those items supported. When you stop using possessions to communicate social status, you discover authentic self-expression. When you quit acquiring objects to fill internal voids, you finally have opportunity to address what created those voids. Most people resist this principle because it requires admitting how much of their identity depends on external validation. Your designer handbag doesn't make you sophisticated. Your expensive watch doesn't make you successful. Your luxury car doesn't make you valuable. These items may provide temporary confidence boosts, but they also create dependency on continued validation through material means. The ruthless approach involves examining every possession through the lens of authentic necessity versus ego enhancement. Does this item serve a practical function in your current life, or does it exist primarily to impress others? Does owning this object genuinely bring you joy, or does it mainly serve to maintain a certain image? Are you keeping this possession because you love it, or because discarding it would challenge your identity? This level of honesty can be uncomfortable, but it's also incredibly liberating. When you release attachment to status-based possessions, you discover that your worth never depended on them. When you stop performing identity through objects, you have energy to develop authentic character. When you quit seeking external validation through accumulation, you can finally address the internal insecurities that drove the behavior. Fifth truth. The fifth principle operates from the understanding that physical clutter is always a reflection of mental and emotional clutter. Your external environment mirrors your internal state. Chaotic spaces indicate chaotic thinking. Excessive accumulation reveals difficulty with decision-making and priority setting. Inability to release possessions often correlates with inability to release limiting beliefs, toxic relationships, and self-defeating patterns. By the evening of the first day, she noticed something shifting inside as boxes left the house. Each released category of items created space not just in rooms, but in her mind. Without piles of unread magazines creating guilt about unfinished intentions, she felt lighter. Without closets full of clothes that no longer fit creating shame about body changes, she felt more accepting. Without rooms full of unused items creating pressure to eventually use them, she felt free. This connection between external order and internal peace explains why decluttering can feel so emotionally challenging. You're not just releasing objects, you're confronting the mental patterns that attracted those objects. You're not just organizing space, you're examining the beliefs that created chaotic relationships with possessions. You're not just discarding items, you're releasing identity stories that no longer serve your evolution. Most people approach this backwards. They try to organize their external world while leaving their internal world completely unexamined. They rearrange possessions without addressing the emotional patterns that created excessive accumulation. They focus on making their spaces look better without understanding why they struggled with maintenance in the first place. The Ruthless approach uses physical decluttering as meditation on mental decluttering. What thoughts do you need to release? What beliefs no longer serve your growth? What emotional patterns keep creating chaos in your relationships? What mental habits drain energy without providing value? What identity stories limit your potential? As you release physical items that represent outdated versions of yourself, you simultaneously release psychological patterns that supported those versions. As you create space in your environment, you create space in your consciousness. As you simplify your surroundings, you clarify your priorities. This parallel process explains why successful decluttering often coincides with major life transitions. External transformation supports internal transformation. Physical release enables emotional release. Environmental clarity creates mental clarity. Sixth truth. The sixth principle recognizes that attachment to objects often represents attachment to control, security, and predictability in a fundamentally uncertain existence. We accumulate possessions as buffers against life's natural chaos, as insurance policies against unknown futures. as proof that we have some influence over circumstances beyond our influence. On the second morning, she found herself moving faster, making decisions with increasing ease. The process had become less about individual items and more about practicing detachment from outcomes. Each released possession was training in letting go of the illusion that external arrangements could provide lasting security. This shift from attachment to detachment transforms decluttering from practical task into spiritual practice. You're not just cleaning house, you're learning to hold life lightly. You're not just organizing possessions, you're developing comfort with impermanence. You're not just releasing objects, you're releasing the exhausting attempt to control uncontrollable circumstances. The fear underlying excessive accumulation is almost always fear of scarcity, abandonment, or insignificance. We keep items just in case we need them because we don't trust our ability to handle future challenges. We maintain possessions that belong to departed loved ones because we fear losing connection with them. We cling to objects that represent past achievements because we worry about future worthiness. These fears are understandable but ultimately limiting. Just in case thinking keeps you preparing for disasters instead of creating opportunities. Clinging to past representations prevents you from engaging present possibilities. Using possessions as security blankets weakens your confidence in your natural resilience and adaptability. The ruthless approach requires developing trust in your ability to handle whatever circumstances arise. This doesn't mean being careless or unprepared. It means distinguishing between reasonable preparation and fear-based hoarding. It means building confidence in your resourcefulness rather than your resources. It means finding security in adaptability rather than accumulation. When you release the illusion that possessions provide security, you discover that real security comes from within. When you stop using objects as emotional crutches, you develop actual emotional strength. When you quit accumulating things to control the future, you become more present and responsive to current opportunities. Seventh truth. The seventh and final principle is the most profound, the one that transforms decluttering from temporary fix into permanent life practice. True freedom comes not from having nothing, but from needing nothing. This doesn't mean living in deprivation or rejecting all material comforts. It means developing such complete internal security that external circumstances cannot disturb your peace. By the afternoon of the second day, the house was empty except for essentials she would take to her new home. But something had fundamentally shifted beyond the physical clearing. She had discovered that she could release everything and still be herself. Her identity, her worth, her capacity for joy didn't depend on any external arrangement. The house had been cleared, but more importantly, the fear had been cleared. This realization is what separates temporary decluttering from lasting transformation. Most people clear their spaces only to refill them with new accumulations because they never address the internal patterns that created the clutter. They organize their possessions without transforming their relationship with possessing. They clean their environments without cleaning their consciousness. The ruthless approach uses physical release as training for psychological release. Every item you can release without anxiety strengthens your trust in your intrinsic wholeness. Every possession you can appreciate without attachment develops your capacity for present moment enjoyment. Every object you can use without clinging teaches you the difference between engagement and dependency. This is the secret that seniors who have faced real loss understand intuitively. Nothing external can provide lasting security, satisfaction, or significance. Health can be lost, relationships can end, possessions can be destroyed, money can disappear, but the consciousness that experiences all these changes remains constant. The awareness that witnesses all external transformations cannot itself be transformed. When you discover this truth not intellectually but experientially, when you feel your own unchanging essence beneath all changing circumstances, decluttering becomes effortless. You keep what serves without clinging to what comforts. You appreciate beauty without being enslaved by it. You use possessions as tools rather than identity props. This is not detachment born from pain or disappointment. This is freedom born from understanding, not withdrawal from life, but full engagement without dependency, not rejecting material existence, but relating to it from wholeness rather than neediness. The woman standing in her empty house wasn't experiencing loss. She was experiencing liberation. not because she had nothing, but because she needed nothing from external sources to be complete. The house had been cleared, but more importantly, the path had been cleared for a life based on being rather than having, essence rather than accumulation, presence rather than possession. This is the invitation hidden within every moment of letting go, not to become less, but to discover that you were already whole, not to have nothing but to need nothing, not to withdraw from the world, but to engage with it from such complete internal security that no external change can disturb your fundamental peace. The seventh principle isn't a technique, it's a recognition. You are already everything you have been seeking through accumulation. You already possess everything you have been trying to acquire through possessing. The freedom you want exists not in having more or less, but in needing nothing external to be complete. When this recognition becomes your lived reality, decluttering happens naturally, effortlessly, joyfully, not as loss, but as liberation, not as ending, but as beginning, not as empty space, but as infinite possibility. Closing 9:45 Tensoy. The woman locked the door for the final time and walked toward her new beginning. She carried one suitcase and 47 years of wisdom. In losing everything external, she had found everything essential. The house was empty, but she had never been more full. This is the paradox that changes everything. The less you need from the world, the more the world can give you. The question isn't what you own, but what owns you. The answer determines whether you live in freedom or furniture stores. The choice, as always, is yours.